The lights went out across an entire nation. 10 million people plunged into darkness for the third time in weeks. And while Cuba burned, while hospitals lost power, while food rotted in refrigerators, while the elderly gasped for air and stifling heat, the President of the United States looked at the suffering and saw opportunity. Donald Trump does not see a humanitarian crisis. He sees real estate. He sees a strategic prize. He sees the honor, his word, of taking Cuba. And tonight we expose the secret talks, the backchannel negotiations, the diplomatic maneuvering that could end 80 years of Cuban independence. This is not speculation. This is confirmed. This is happening. And you need to know before the rest of the world catches up. Drop a comment if you're watching, because what I'm about to reveal will change how you see American power forever. The blackout began at 6:47 p.m. local time, Havana time, the third nationwide power failure in less than a month. The Cuban government called it sabotage. The opposition called it incompetence. The truth is probably both. The electrical grid in Cuba is held together by Soviet-era equipment, Chinese spare parts, and sheer willpower. It was failing before the crisis. It is collapsing now. And the collapse is creating the kind of chaos that history teaches us precedes revolution or invasion, or both. Hit subscribe if you want to see how this ends, because the mainstream media is not telling you the full story. But here's what the headlines are not telling you. While the lights were going out, while Cubans were lighting candles and praying for dawn, American and Cuban officials were meeting secretly in third countries through intermediaries, discussing the unthinkable, the possibility that the United States could, would, might take control of Cuba, not through war, not through invasion, but through negotiation, through economic pressure, through the sheer exhaustion of a population that has suffered enough, through the opportunity that crisis creates. Share this video if you think the public deserves to know what their governments are hiding. Donald Trump has made his intentions clear publicly, repeatedly. He wants Cuba. He has said he will have the honor of taking it. He has framed it as liberation, as rescue, as the natural order of American power reasserting itself in its own hemisphere. And he has the mechanism to do it. The Monroe Doctrine, the Roosevelt Corollary, the historical precedent used dozens of times in the last 2 centuries that the United States has the right, the duty, the destiny to intervene in the Western Hemisphere when instability threatens American interests. And right now, Cuba is the definition of instability. Drop a comment. Do you think Trump really wants to help Cuba or just wants to own it? The secret talks began in January, after Trump took office, after he began reversing the limited openings that the Biden administration had negotiated, after he reimposed sanctions, after he cut remittances, after he squeezed the Cuban economy to the point of breaking. And then when the breaking began, when the blackout started, when the protests erupted, he sent signals through back channels, through business figures with interests in both countries, through diplomatic intermediaries in Europe and Latin America. Signals that said, we can solve this, we can fix this, we can save Cuba, but the price is sovereignty. The price is independence. The price is becoming, effectively, an American protectorate. Hit subscribe if you want to see what that price looks like in dollars and in dignity. The Cuban government is divided on how to respond. Hardliners, led by the old guard of the Communist Party, want to resist. Want to appeal to Russia, to China, to any power that can counter American pressure. Want to believe that sovereignty is worth any suffering, that dignity is worth any sacrifice, that the revolution, their revolution, the revolution that has defined their lives and their country for 3 generations, is worth defending to the end. But the end is looking increasingly like collapse, like famine, like the kind of social breakdown that does not end with the preservation of sovereignty, but with its violent overthrow. Share this if you think sovereignty matters more than survival. The pragmatists in the Cuban government see a different path. They see negotiation, they see a managed transition, they see the possibility of preserving some autonomy, some culture, some identity within an American sphere of influence. They look at Puerto Rico and see a model, not quite a state, not quite independent, but protected, funded, supported, with power that works and hospitals that function and an economy that produces. They look at the Dominican Republic and see another model. independent in name, integrated in practice, with American investment, American tourism, American security guarantees. They look at the alternatives and they see that the only thing worse than American dominance might be American indifference, might be the chaos that follows total collapse. Drop a comment. Would you choose American protection or total collapse? The secret talks that are underway, that have been confirmed by multiple sources in both Washington and Havana, that are being conducted in neutral locations, with the knowledge but not the formal approval of senior officials on both sides, are exploring these possibilities. They are discussing what a transition would look like, how American investment would flow, how Cuban property would be treated, how the exiles in Miami would be integrated, how the security services would be reformed, how the political prisoners would be released, how the economy would be rebuilt. The details are granular. The implications are staggering. The fact that they are happening at all is a revolution in American-Cuban relations. Hit subscribe if you want to see the documents they're hiding. But here is the critical question, the question that no one in the talks is asking publicly, the question that you need to consider, the question that will determine the future of Cuba and the future of American foreign policy. Is this liberation or occupation? Is this rescue or theft? Is this the natural order of humanitarian intervention or the cynical exploitation of suffering? The answer depends on where you stand, on what you believe about American power, about Cuban sovereignty, about the rights of nations to determine their own fate, about the responsibilities of powerful nations to help those in crisis. Share this video if you think this question matters. The historical context matters here. The United States has intervened in Cuba before, repeatedly. In 1898, to end Spanish colonial rule and then to impose its own. In 1906, to restore order. In 1912, to protect American property. In 1933, to prevent revolution. In 1961, to overthrow Castro disastrously at the Bay of Pigs. For 60 years, from 1961 to 2021, the policy was isolation, sanctions, pressure, the hope that the communist government would collapse under its own weight. It did not. It survived, it adapted, it found support from the Soviet Union, from Venezuela, from China. And now, with Venezuela collapsing, with Russia distracted, with China cautious, the pressure is finally working. The question is, what replaces the pressure? What replaces the regime? What replaces the system that has governed Cuba for 3 generations? Drop a comment. Is American intervention ever truly benevolent? The humanitarian argument for American intervention is powerful. Cuba is suffering. The blackouts are not inconveniences. They are life-threatening. Hospitals are losing power during surgery. Vaccines are spoiling in failed refrigeration. Water treatment plants are shutting down. Disease is spreading. The economy is contracting by double digits. Inflation is making basic goods unaffordable. The currency is worthless. Remittances, the lifeline that kept millions afloat, have been cut. The people are hungry. The people are desperate. The people are leaving in record numbers, risking their lives on rafts to reach Florida, dying in the straits. The argument says that intervention, even intervention that compromises sovereignty, is better than this, better than death, better than collapse, better than the slow agony of a failed state. Hit subscribe if you want to see what intervention really looks like on the ground. But the sovereignty argument is equally powerful. Cuba is a nation with a history, with a culture, with a people who have fought for independence for a century and a half, who resisted Spain, who resisted the United States, who built a revolution, however flawed, however authoritarian, however economically illiterate. That was their own. That was not imposed from outside. That represented, at least in its origins, the aspirations of a people for dignity, for equality, for self-determination. To take that away, to replace it with American management, however benevolent, however efficient, is to erase a nation, to absorb it into an empire, to repeat the patterns of colonialism that the 20th century was supposed to have ended. Share this if you believe sovereignty is absolute. And there is the strategic argument, the realpolitik that drives American interest. Cuba is 90 miles from Florida, 90 miles from the United States, 90 miles that have been a threat for 60 years. A Soviet ally, a Russian outpost, a potential Chinese base, a platform for surveillance, for signals intelligence, for military operations against the American homeland. The argument for control is not just humanitarian. It is not just economic. It is security. It is the Monroe Doctrine in the 21st century. The belief that the Western Hemisphere is American, that foreign powers have no place in it, that instability in the hemisphere is a threat to the United States, that the best way to ensure stability is to ensure control. Drop a comment. Do you support the Monroe Doctrine? The secret talks are exploring all these dimensions: the humanitarian, the economic, the strategic, the political. They are discussing what Cuba would look like as an American protectorate, how much autonomy would be preserved, how much American law would apply, how the military would be restructured, how the police would be trained, how the courts would be reformed, how property would be returned to exiles, how new investment would be protected, how the transition would be managed, how the optics would be handled, how the world would be convinced that this is liberation, not occupation, that this is choice, not coercion, that this is what the Cuban people want, not what the American government is imposing. Hit subscribe if you want to see the full list of what they're negotiating away. But the Cuban people are not being asked, not yet. The talks are between governments, between officials, between representatives of power structures that have failed their people in different ways. The communist government that has impoverished Cuba, the American government that has isolated it. Both are negotiating over the heads of the Cuban people. Both are deciding the fate of a nation without its consent. This is the pattern of great power politics. It is not the pattern of democracy. It is not the pattern of self-determination. It is the pattern of empire, of real estate, of the strong doing what they can and the weak suffering what they must. Share this if you think the Cuban people deserve a vote. The economic details of the proposed transition are staggering. American corporations are already positioning for access to Cuban markets, to Cuban labor, to Cuban resources, the sugar industry, the nickel mines, the tourism potential, the biotechnology sector, the pharmaceutical research, the offshore oil reserves, the strategic location for logistics and shipping. The value of Cuba, measured in dollars and cents, runs into the hundreds of billions. And that value, right now, is being negotiated in rooms where no Cuban citizen sits, where no Cuban voter has representation, where the future of an entire economy is being divided among foreign interests before the Cuban people even know the deal is being made. Drop a comment. Who should own Cuba's future? The security implications are equally profound. An American military presence in Cuba, naval bases, airfields, intelligence facilities, the end of any Russian or Chinese influence in the Caribbean, the consolidation of American hemispheric dominance, the extension of the security perimeter to 90 miles from the Florida coast, but this time with American flags flying, the transformation of Cuba from a potential threat to a platform for projection, from a vulnerability to an asset, from a problem to a solution. This is what the Pentagon wants. This is what the intelligence community wants. This is what the national security establishment has wanted for 60 years. And now, finally, the opportunity is here. Hit subscribe if you want to see the military plans they're hiding. The regional implications extend beyond Cuba. If the United States takes Cuba, what message does that send to the rest of Latin America? To Venezuela, already collapsing? To Nicaragua, already isolated? To Bolivia, already struggling? The message is clear. The Monroe Doctrine is back. The American sphere of influence is expanding. The era of non-intervention is over. The era of American management has begun. And every government in the hemisphere, whether allied or opposed, must now calculate its future based on American power, must now consider whether resistance is possible or accommodation is necessary, must now decide whether sovereignty is worth the price that Cuba is paying. Share this if you think Latin America is watching. The international reaction is being carefully managed. The Europeans are silent. They have their own crises, their own interests, no desire to challenge American power in its own hemisphere. The Russians are protesting, but weakly. Their resources are stretched by Ukraine. Their influence in Cuba, once vast, is now limited. The Chinese are calculating. They have economic interests in Cuba. They have strategic interests in the Caribbean, but they are not prepared to confront the United States over an island that is, in their calculation, ultimately disposable. The international community, such as it is, will accept American intervention in Cuba. We'll call it humanitarian. We'll call it necessary. We'll call it an internal matter of American foreign policy, and the precedent will be set. Drop a comment. Which country is next? The legal framework for American intervention is being prepared. The State Department is reviewing the historical precedents, the legal justifications, the international law arguments, the domestic authority under the Constitution, the War Powers Act, the authorization for use of military force, the emergency powers, the executive authority. The legal memos are being written. The arguments are being refined. The case is being built, not for war, not for invasion, but for transition, for assistance, for stabilization, for protection. The legal language will be neutral, the legal effect will be transformative, and the legal justification will be available the moment the deal is announced. Hit subscribe if you want to see the legal memos before they're released. The media coverage of the crisis is being managed. The narrative is being shaped. The story is not about American pressure. It is not about secret talks. It is not about the erosion of Cuban sovereignty. It is about humanitarian crisis, about failed infrastructure, about desperate people, about the need for rescue, about the generosity of American intervention. The images are selected, the angles are chosen, the experts are quoted, the editorials are written, the public opinion is being prepared. The American people are being told that this is not imperialism, this is not occupation, this is not the theft of a nation, this is help, this is rescue, this is what good neighbors do, and the polls suggest that the narrative is working, that the American public supports intervention, that the humanitarian argument is winning, that the Monroe Doctrine, never really forgotten, is being remembered as a doctrine of protection rather than domination. Share this if you see through the narrative. The opposition to intervention is being marginalized. The voices that speak for Cuban sovereignty are being dismissed as communist sympathizers, as regime apologists, as enemies of freedom. The voices that question American motives are being labeled as anti-American, as unpatriotic, as naive. The debate is being narrowed. The options are being limited. The choice is being framed as between American rescue and Cuban collapse, between humanitarian intervention and humanitarian catastrophe, between the honor of taking Cuba and the shame of abandoning it. And in that framing, the real questions are being lost. The real choices are being hidden. The real stakes are being obscured. Drop a comment. Are you being told the full truth? The timeline for the deal is accelerating. The blackouts are the trigger. The crisis is the opportunity. The suffering is the justification. The talks are the mechanism. The announcement is the culmination. Within weeks, perhaps days, the deal will be public. The transition will begin. The American presence will be established. The Cuban government will be reformed. The Cuban economy will be opened. The Cuban people will be told that this is their liberation, that this is their rescue, that this is their future. And the world will watch, and history will judge, and we will all live with the consequences. Hit subscribe if you want to see the moment the deal drops. I am asking you 3 questions. First, if you were a Cuban citizen without power, without food, without hope, would you welcome American intervention or resist it as occupation? Second, do you believe Trump genuinely wants to help Cuba or simply sees it as real estate to be acquired? Third, if America takes Cuba, which nation is next in the hemisphere? Answer in the comments. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, because when these secret talks leak, when the deal is announced, when the fate of 11 million people is decided, you will hear it here first. This is the global eye. We do not just report the news. We expose the deals that change the world.